My brother called our parents' house his safety net. What he never told anyone was that he had already cut the ropes. I found out the same afternoon my mother sat across from me at the Thanksgiving table and told me I was going to co-sign a business loan for him. She said it like she was asking me to pass the gravy. She had no idea I was holding a folder in my bag that would end everything she thought she knew about her golden boy. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That's how this story ends. Let me tell you how it started. I am 32 years old. I am a senior financial analyst at an accounting firm in Columbus, Ohio. I have spent the last 9 years building something from absolutely nothing, and I mean that literally. I graduated with student loan debt, a beat-up Honda Civic with a cracked windshield, and a degree in accounting that my father called a boring choice for a boring person. That comment was directed at me while my brother, who had just dropped out of his second college in 3 years, was handed a check for $6,000 to find himself on a road trip to the Pacific Coast. My brother's name is Derek. He is 29 years old, and he has never held a job longer than 8 months in his life. Not because the jobs were bad, because Derek does not believe that rules apply to him. He has had phases. There was the food truck phase, the real estate wholesaling phase, the dropshipping phase, and my personal favorite, the 6-week period where he was absolutely certain he was going to become a professional poker player. Each phase ended the same way. Badly. Loudly. With someone else cleaning up the mess. That someone was usually me. I tell you this not to sound bitter, though I will admit I have earned the right to a little bitterness. I tell you this so you understand the full picture of what was happening at that Thanksgiving table. Because context matters. And because what my parents were about to ask me was not a surprise attack. It was the latest in a very long line of ambushes I had been walking into my entire adult life. Each one a little larger, a little more expensive, and a little more brazen than the last. I drove to my parents' house in Westerville that Thursday morning, knowing something was coming. My mother had called me twice in the 2 weeks before the holiday, and both times the conversation had circled around Derek without landing on anything specific. She mentioned he had a great new opportunity. She mentioned the economy was impossible for young people. She mentioned twice that I had done so well for myself. That phrase, when it comes from my mother, is never a compliment. It is reconnaissance. It is her measuring how much I have before she decides how much to take. I want to be honest about one thing, because I know people always ask this. Why did I keep going? Why did I keep showing up to these dinners, these holidays, these calculated gatherings where I left feeling hollowed out? The answer is embarrassing in its simplicity. I kept going because I thought, every single time, that this time might be different. That maybe my father would ask me about my work with genuine interest, that maybe my mother would hug me first instead of reaching past me to straighten Derek's collar, that maybe some version of the family I wanted would show up at that table. It never did, but I kept setting a place for it. I arrived at 11. The house smelled like roasting turkey and my mother's vanilla candle, the one she only burned on holidays. Derek's truck was already in the driveway, freshly washed and detailed, which was notable because Derek had told me 2 months earlier that he was between finances and couldn't make it to my work event because he couldn't afford gas. My mother met me at the door. She hugged me, and I noticed she held on a half-second longer than usual, a warning sign I cataloged and filed. Derek was on the couch watching football. He looked up when I walked in, gave me the lazy half-wave he reserved for people he considered beneath his attention, and looked back at the screen. He was wearing a new jacket, North Face, fleece-lined, easily $150. My father was in the kitchen pretending to help, which meant he was standing near the counter holding a spatula and commenting on my mother's cooking. We sat down at 1 o'clock. My mother had made everything from scratch, which she always did on Thanksgiving, and which Derek always took credit for when anyone complimented the meal. We were halfway through the main course when my mother set down her fork, folded her hands on the table, and looked at me with the specific expression I had come to think of as the ask face. Soft eyes, slightly tilted head. The performance of reasonableness. She said Derek had been working on something incredible, a restaurant. A real one this time, not a food truck, a brick-and-mortar establishment in the short north neighborhood of Columbus. She said he had a location, a concept, a menu. She said all he needed was financing. I asked what kind of financing. My father cleared his throat. He said banks had been difficult. He said Derek had gone to 3 lenders and been turned down because of his credit history. He said it wasn't Derek's fault, his credit was damaged. He said the economy, the pandemic, bad luck, a string of things no one could have predicted. He said these things without making eye contact with me, which told me he already knew how thin the argument was. My mother reached across the table and put her hand over mine. She said they needed me to co-sign a business loan for Derek, $250,000. I sat with that number for a moment. I turned it over. $250,000. My name on a loan. My credit score. My financial reputation. My professional standing. All of it leveraged against Derek's track record of quitting everything he had ever started. I asked when they had decided this. My father said they hadn't decided anything. They were asking. He said the word asking the way people say it when they mean telling. My mother said it was a formality. She said Derek had a business plan, investors lined up, a lease already signed. She said my name on the paperwork was just to satisfy the bank's requirements. A technicality. She said I wouldn't be responsible for anything because Derek would handle all the payments. I looked at Derek. He was cutting his turkey with the focused attention of someone who is rehearsed looking casual. He had definitely coached this conversation. The investors lined up line was too polished to be my mother's phrasing. I asked about the investors. Derek looked up. He said they were coming through. He said the timeline was close. He said he just needed the loan secured first so he could show them the asset. I said that was not how investors worked. He said I didn't understand the restaurant industry. I said I was a financial analyst and I understood lending instruments and personal liability better than most people sitting at most Thanksgiving tables in Ohio. My mother said I was being negative. My father said I had always been like this. Careful to the point of cruelty, he said. My sister-in-law, Derek's ex-girlfriend who had left him 14 months ago with good reason, had said the same thing, that I made people feel small with my so-called practicality. I noticed he was quoting Derek's ex-girlfriend, a woman they had openly disliked while she was in Derek's life, now apparently useful as a character witness against me. I put my fork down. I told them I was not going to co-sign the loan. My mother's eyes filled immediately. Derek's jaw tightened. My father's face went the particular shade of red it went when he felt his authority had been questioned. My father said I was being selfish. He said I made a good salary. He said I had a condo I had bought 2 years ago that had already appreciated significantly. He said I had resources that Derek did not have because I had been lucky, not because I had worked harder. He said luck was not a virtue, and I had no right to hoard it. My mother said Derek was her child. She said both of us were her children. She said she did not understand how I could watch my brother struggle while I sat comfortable. She said if the situation were reversed, Derek would help me without hesitation. I almost laughed at that. Almost. Derek was watching me now. There was something in his expression I had not expected. Not entitlement, which I had braced for. Something sharper. Calculation. He was watching me the way someone watches a door they are not certain will open. My mother said just this once. She said this was different from the other times. She said this was Derek's real chance. I had heard this before. The food truck was Derek's real chance. The real estate course he paid $4,000 for was Derek's real chance. I had given money for 2 of those chances. Small amounts, presented as loans, never repaid, never mentioned again. I told them I needed to think about it. My mother's face eased. She thought that was a yes in disguise. Derek's shoulders dropped slightly. My father refilled his glass. What none of them knew was that I had already been thinking about it for 6 weeks. I had not been thinking about whether to sign. I had been thinking about why the ask was happening at all. Because $250,000 was not just a formality. No lender structures a loan that way. If Derek had investors lined up and a signed lease, he would have been fundable on his own terms. The fact that he needed a co-signer with my credit profile meant the deal looked worse than they were presenting it. I had spent 3 evenings in October pulling every public record I could find connected to Derek's name and the business entity he had registered in September. What I found had kept me up for most of a Wednesday night. I excused myself after dessert. My parents took that as confirmation. My mother hugged me in the kitchen, and whispered that I was doing the right thing. My father shook my hand, which he had not done since my college graduation. Derek grinned and said he knew I'd come through. I drove home with the folder still in my bag and sat at my kitchen table for a long time looking at what I had printed. Let me explain what I found. Derek had registered an LLC in September, as I mentioned. What he had not mentioned to my parents was that this was his third LLC in 4 years. The first two had been dissolved following small claims, judgments totaling just over $40,000 combined, unpaid vendors, an employee who had never received final wages, a landlord who had never gotten his last 2 months of rent. But that was not the worst of it. The worst of it was the second document. A hard inquiry on a credit report is a matter of public record in certain dispute filings. 3 months ago, someone had attempted to open a line of credit using a Social Security number that I recognized because I had seen it on a tax form years ago when I briefly helped my parents file an amended return. It was my mother's Social Security number. The application had been denied, but the attempt was documented, and the address listed on the application was not my parents' house. It was the address of Derek's most recent apartment. I sat with that for a long time too. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment. It was not anger, not yet. It was grief. The particular grief of a thing you suspected being confirmed. I had protected my parents in my mind for years from the full reality of who Derek was. I had told myself they were naive, not complicit. I had told myself they loved him blindly because they loved him. What I was looking at suggested that their blind spot had a cost they did not know they were paying. I picked up the phone and called a friend of mine who works in banking compliance. I explained what I had found. She told me what it meant and what my options were. We talked for 40 minutes. When I hung up, I had a plan. My cousin's engagement party was 3 weeks away, the weekend after Thanksgiving. My aunt had rented a private room at a restaurant downtown. The whole family would be there. Both sets of parents, grandparents, the kind of gathering where news travels at the speed of embarrassment. I had not planned to say anything there. I want to be clear about that. What changed my mind was a phone call from my mother on the Monday after Thanksgiving. She called to tell me the loan paperwork was ready to sign, and Derek needed it by Friday. She said it would only take an hour. She said she had already told the family at Thanksgiving that I was helping Derek get started. She said people were proud of me. She had already told people, without my agreement, she had spent Thanksgiving weekend building a social architecture around a decision I had not made, creating a situation where my refusal would read as a betrayal of something already announced. It was not accidental. My mother is not an accidental woman. That was when I decided I would be at my cousin's party. I arrived 20 minutes late, which I had timed carefully. The room was full. My aunt had done it beautifully. Flowers on every table, string lights along the walls, a bar set up near the window. My cousin was glowing in the way that people glow when something good is finally happening to them. I made my rounds. I hugged my cousin and her fiancé. I spoke to my grandparents. I accepted a glass of sparkling cider from a server and stood near the edge of the room watching the door. My parents arrived with Derek 7 minutes later. Derek had a woman with him I did not recognize. She was laughing at something he had said. He looked relaxed, comfortable, the picture of a man whose problems were already solved. My mother was wearing her green dress, the one she wore when she wanted to feel important. My father was holding her elbow the way he always did at family events, proprietary and proud. My mother saw me and smiled broadly. She crossed the room and took my arm and said she was so glad I was there and that Derek had news to share with the family tonight. Did I know? She said it with the performance of someone who had scripted the evening. I said I had some news too. Something in my voice registered. Her smile held, but her eyes changed. I said I'd been doing some research. She said this was neither the time nor the place for my concerns, a phrase she used when she wanted to preemptively close a conversation. I said she was right. I said I should probably just talk to Derek directly and let him explain it to everyone himself. I walked across the room to where Derek was standing with my father and the woman he had brought. I said hello. Derek introduced the woman as a friend. My father looked pleased that I had come to them first. He clapped me on the shoulder and said he was glad we were going to get this handled. I asked Derek, in a voice that was completely calm, what address he had used when he applied for a credit line in my mother's name in August. The room did not go silent. The party continued around us, but within our small circle, everything stopped. Derek's face did something complicated. His first instinct was to look at my father. His second instinct was to smile like I had made a joke. His third instinct was to take a half step backward, which was the honest one. He said he did not know what I was talking about. I opened my bag and took out the folder. I told my father that 3 months ago, someone had attempted to open a $12,000 line of credit at a furniture supplier using my mother's social security number and Derek's apartment as the billing address. I told him the application had been denied because my mother's credit had already been affected by 2 other inquiries in the past 18 months that she had not authorized. My father looked at the paper. He was squinting the way he did when he was reading something he did not want to understand. My mother had appeared at my father's elbow. She looked at the paper, and then at Derek. She said his name like a question. Derek said I was making things up. He said I was jealous of him. I had always been jealous of him, and this was the kind of thing I did when I felt threatened. He said it loudly, because he wanted the volume to be the argument. I said there were 3 credit inquiries in her name. I said the most recent one listed his business entity as the referenced company. I said I had spoken with a banking compliance officer about what those documents represented and what the legal term was for using another person's identifying information to apply for credit without their consent. My mother said quietly that she had never given Derek permission to do that. Derek said it was a misunderstanding. He said he had meant to ask her. He said the timeline was complicated and he was going to explain everything once the restaurant was funded. He said I was blowing it out of proportion to make him look bad in front of the family, which was exactly the kind of thing I always did, which was why no one in this family actually liked being around me. My father was still holding the paper. His face had gone the red I recognized, but it was a different red now. Not the red of authority being challenged. The red of a man realizing he has been moving furniture in a house that belonged to someone else. He asked Derek if this was true. Derek said the business plan was solid. He said once the loan went through, everything would get resolved. He said he needed my co-signature to finalize the funding, and once the restaurant opened, he would take care of everything, and this would all look like an overreaction. My father asked the question again. Just, is this true? Derek said he had done what he had to do because nobody in this family had ever actually supported him. He said he had watched me get praised for my whole life for playing it safe, while he took risks and got nothing. He said if I had just helped him from the beginning, none of this would have been necessary. He said I had forced his hand. My mother made a sound I had never heard from her before. It was not crying. It was something quieter and more final than crying. She said she had trusted him with a form last year. He had told her it was for an insurance update. The insurance update. Derek had her sign something she thought was paperwork for a beneficiary change and had used it to obtain her identifying information for a credit application. My banking compliance contact had told me this was the most likely scenario when I described the timeline. I had hoped she was wrong. My father put the paper down on the nearest table. He looked at Derek for a long moment. He said nothing. That silence was the loudest thing I had ever heard from my father in my life. He had never once in Derek's life been fully quiet in the face of something Derek had done. He had always found the angle, the extenuating circumstance, the way the story could be tilted so the fault landed somewhere other than his son. He had no angle for this one. The woman Derek had brought was very still. She was looking at Derek with an expression that suggested this was not the evening she had anticipated. Derek said he needed everyone to calm down. I said I had already filed a fraud report with the bank. I said my mother had the right to dispute the unauthorized inquiries and have them removed from her credit history. I said I had the contact information for the process, and I would share it with her directly. I said I was not going to co-sign anything. I said I had never been going to co-sign anything, and I was sorry it had taken this setting to say so clearly because I had spent years trying to deliver difficult truths in private where they could be minimized, and I was done with private. Derek called me a name. It was the kind of name that, in a room full of family, lands like a door slamming. My aunt appeared at my elbow. She took my arm very gently and steered me a few feet away toward the bar. She poured me a glass of water and told me to breathe. She said she had seen this coming for years. She said she was sorry it had fallen to me. I drank the water. Across the room, my father was talking to Derek in the controlled, quiet voice he used when he was past shouting. Derek was talking back with his hands, gesturing, defending. My mother was sitting at a table by herself with her purse in her lap and her hands folded over it, staring at nothing. I stayed for another 30 minutes, long enough to hug my cousin again and to make sure she knew the disruption was not her fault and her party was still beautiful. She squeezed my hand and said she had always thought Derek was a problem. I appreciated her honesty. I drove home without seeing my parents again that night. The weeks that followed were not clean. I want to say that because I think people expect this kind of story to conclude with a neat emotional resolution. The clouds parting, the villain carried off, the righteous person standing in golden light. It does not work that way. Derek did not get the loan. Without my co-signature, and with the fraud inquiry now documented, no lender would touch the application. The restaurant deal collapsed. The lease he had supposedly already signed turned out to be a letter of intent, not a binding agreement, a distinction that became relevant when he tried to claim damages. My mother went through the process of disputing the unauthorized credit inquiries. It took 4 months. I helped her with the paperwork. We spoke on the phone more during those 4 months than we had in the previous 2 years, but only about practical things. Documents, timelines, who to call at which institution. We did not talk about Derek except when necessary. We did not talk about Thanksgiving. There was a version of a relationship forming between us that was honest in a way our previous one had never been. But it was slow and careful, and I did not know yet what it would become. My father called me once, in January. He said he owed me something. He did not say the word apology. He said he had let things go on too long, and he should have paid closer attention. For my father, that was significant. I thanked him and meant it. Derek left Columbus in February. I heard through my aunt that he had moved to Arizona, where a friend had offered him a floor to sleep on while he figured things out. My mother told me, with a flatness in her voice that was new and sad, that she had not heard from him since he left. She had sent a birthday text in March. He had not responded. I think about that sometimes. The cost of a lifetime of protection. My parents spent 29 years building a scaffolding around Derek, so he would never have to stand fully in the weight of his own choices. And what they built, in the end, was a person who did not know how to love them back. A person who saw their trust as an asset to be liquidated. I am not without sympathy for how they got there. I understand the particular terror of watching a child struggle. I understand the impulse to absorb the damage so they don't have to. I understand it. And I also know that I cannot carry that understanding as a reason to keep standing inside the blast radius. I started seeing a therapist in December. Her office is 12 minutes from my condo, on the second floor of a building with very good natural light. We have talked extensively about the difference between loyalty and coercion, about how the feeling of being needed can masquerade as love until you look at it closely, about what it means to stop performing a role that was assigned to you before you were old enough to audition for it. She told me something in our 4th session that I have been sitting with since. She said the goal of healing is not to stop feeling the loss. The goal is to stop letting the loss make your decisions for you. I think about that on the mornings I wake up and check my phone, and there is no message demanding anything from me. There is only my apartment, my coffee, the work I chose, the life I built out of the materials that were actually mine to use. Last month I got a promotion, Senior Financial Analyst, to Director of Financial Planning and Analysis. It comes with a team of 6 and a significant salary increase and work that I find genuinely interesting. I sent a brief email to my parents to tell them. My mother responded within the hour. She said she was proud of me. She said it simply, without a follow-up ask, without a pivot to something she needed. Just, I am proud of you. I read it 3 times. I don't know what the next chapter looks like. I am not ready to have the larger conversations yet, the ones that would require going back through decades of accumulated imbalance and calling it what it was, out loud. Maybe I will be ready for that eventually. Maybe some of those conversations will never happen, and we will build something new alongside the wreckage of the old thing. I don't know. I am 32 years old, and I am learning for the first time to make decisions without calculating how much they will cost me in approval. It turns out that is much harder than co-signing a loan, but the interest rate is one I can actually afford.